तक लंदन में गाइज एंड सेंट थॉमस हॉस्पिटल के अंदर कंसल्टेंट थे और 2018 में कतर मूव हुए, वहाँ पे उनकी सर्विसेज दे रहे हैं। अब सिदरा मेडिकल सेंटर बड़ा हॉस्पिटल है दोहा के अंदर, वहाँ पे उनकी सर्विसेज है। तो उनको बेहतरीन पस मंज़र है वेस्टर्न एंड ईस्टर्न दोनों तरफ का प्रैक्टिसेस का। तो इम्यूनोलॉजिस्ट हैं। इम्यूनोलॉजी शायद सबने सुनी नहीं होगी। इम्यूनोलॉजी वो इल्म है मेडिकल उलूम में से जो बदन के अंदर फितरी निज़ाम होता है, दिफाई निज़ाम। हर कोई बाहर की चीज़ अगर अंदर आ गई तो उसको निकाला कैसा जाए। अल्लाह ताला का ज़बरदस्त निज़ाम है जो कई लोगों को पता नहीं इसके बारे में। कई सारी चीज़ें जो बॉडी के अंदर होते हैं, इन्फेक्शन होते हैं, खुद ब खुद बॉडी जो उसको फाइट करती है। उसमें जो ऊंच-नीच कभी-कभी हो जाती है, उसके इल्म का नाम है इम्यूनोलॉजी। तो डॉक्टर करीम, वेलकम। आई हैंड ओवर द स्क्रीन।
Assalamu alaikum, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Arad Bhai, Salim Bhai, बहुत shukriya for inviting me, and for Javed Bhai for that excellent introduction on the virology. So I'm going to do some in English and some in Urdu. As Arafat Bhai is saying, some of the immune terms are almost impossible to translate into Urdu. So we may have to do those complex immunological terms in English. So as जैसे जावेद भाई कह रहे थे, इंसान के लिए कोविड-19 एक नया वायरस है, आमतौर पर जानवर में पाया जाता है, इसलिए हमारा इम्यून सिस्टम वायरस को नहीं पहचान सक रहा. And this immunity has been shown in certain communities. The other coronaviruses that Javed Bhai was referring to, there is some pre-existing immunity in certain populations, but this does not always translate into protection against this novel coronavirus. So protective immunity to many infections reduces with age. So we know that the elderly are vulnerable to infection. And we also know that those with underlying conditions such as diabetes or chronic heart or lung diseases, they are also vulnerable to infections. And that's why, for example, influenza or pneumococcal vaccines are advised for these groups. And we know that COVID-19 is very dangerous for the elderly. So buzurg log ke liye or log jisko chronic बीमारियां हैं जैसे diabetes या chronic सीने या दिल के बीमारियां, उनके लिए ये virus और खतरनाक है. So the death rates are particularly so in elderly. So for example, this is data from the States showing that 8 out of 10 COVID deaths at this time point were in adults over 65 years. And it's not just the death rates, but if you look at hospitalization, if we're looking at young adults as the comparison group, as you get older, the risk of hospitalization and of death is much higher. And you can see, particularly as you start to get above 65, the rates of hospitalization and death start to go up incredibly high. So for elderly and for those younger patients with chronic diseases, we need to be very, very careful. And so the immune system, again, I'm not going to go into great detail because this would be, beyond the scope of this and would be confusing, but we have innate immunity, which consists of a range of blood cells and proteins that are found in the blood and at mucosal surfaces that protect us against viruses, bacteria, other microbes. And this is a rapid response, which is relatively non-specific. So it doesn't acquire memory. Whereas the adaptive immune response, which consists of lymphocytes, the T and B lymphocytes, this is a slower response, but it's a more sophisticated response, which then develops memory. So if we look at adaptive immunity in more detail, we've got T cells and B cells. The B cells are important because they mature and differentiate and then produce antibodies, whereas the T cells go onto a whole range of different subtypes, of which the most important are the T helper or CD4 T cell and the CD8 or cytotoxic or killer T cell. And all of this is involved in antiviral responses. So If you look on the left side, we've got a T cell, which is a cytotoxic or killer T cell. What it will do is it will recognize a cell which is infected with a virus, because that cell will display a viral peptide or mini protein on its surface and then mark it as foreign or virally infected, and the killer cell will kill that infected cell. On the right, we have B cells, which release antibodies. Now, the antibodies circulate in the blood, and they can bind to a circulating virus and prevent viruses from entering the cells. B cells can also release antibody which binds to virus on cells and releases a cascade of complement and then other innate cells which result in the killing of that cell. So the combination of B cells releasing antibodies and T cells killing infected cells can result in antiviral responses. The APCs, or antigen presenting cells, are able to present to T cells. So they will mop up viral proteins and present them to T cells, encouraging their activation. So when we have an initial infection to a virus or other organism, our response is relatively slow in terms of the antibody response. For example, this similar diagram could be shown for a T cell response. If we encounter the virus again, our secondary immune response is much quicker and larger. And this natural process of immunity is what is also being mimicked by vaccination. So people who do not have a primary immune response, when they have a vaccine, will start to produce antibodies and T cells. And this is why in many of the vaccine dose regimens, there are 2 doses. There's a dose, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, there's a second dose. This is serving to boost and also maintain the duration of the immune response. It remains to be seen whether, like some other vaccines, there is a requirement for a vaccine at 6 months or 12 months. We just don't have that data yet. So as Jawed Bhai was saying, the key is the spike protein. And this is where the vaccine manufacturers have focused their attention, because the spike protein is the means whereby the virus enters the cell. And so they've all focused on this spike protein, whether it be viral vector vaccines, for example, the AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine, or RNA vaccines, which are, for example, the Pfizer or the Moderna. They are all focusing on this spike protein, because if we can produce immune response to the spike protein, we can inhibit entry of the virus into our cells. So this is just a brief summary of how for example, the Oxford vaccine works. So they've taken a harmless virus, the adenovirus, which has also been weakened, and this has incorporated within it the genes for the spike protein. This is injected into the patient, then the vaccine enters the cells, which then start to produce the coronavirus spike protein. The immune response recognizes this as a foreign protein and start to produce antibodies and these cytotoxic or killer T cells, which can then destroy the infected cells. The antibodies, of course, can prevent the virus from binding to the cells in the first place. And of course, this principle is very similar to the RNA vaccine. So in the RNA vaccine, there is no carrier virus at all. They've taken a part of the virus genetic code, and this is a part, again, of the spike protein. So it's not the intact virus, it's not the intact RNA code, it's a small portion. So it therefore cannot replicate, cannot cause disease, cannot cause COVID-19 infection. The vaccine is injected, it enters the cells, and this time the RNA is translated into protein. This is the same coronavirus spike protein. It's recognized by the immune system as foreign, produces antibodies, and then the T cells are also activated in a similar way as the previous vaccine. So then the question is, are these vaccines effective? Do they work? What is the data? So this is data which is provided actually by the FDA and Pfizer, And remember that the Pfizer vaccine, it's called the Pfizer vaccine, but it actually was developed by BioNTech, which is a company based in Germany, which is founded by 2 Turkish Muslim scientists. And then Pfizer partnered with them in order that the vaccine production could be scaled up. And what you can see on this, on both diagrams, on the bottom of both, is the placebo arm. So these were patients, these were subjects who were not given the active vaccine. And what you can see is the rate of developing COVID infection is very low compared to those who were given the placebo, who were developing quite, 2.5% infection rates. And on this side, again, this is the patients, sorry, I may have confused you. This is the patients who have given the vaccine, and this is the line showing patients who received the placebo. And the S's that you can see are patients who developed severe COVID. And you'll see that in the group at the bottom, the vaccine group, there's only one S here. Whereas in here, there's multiple subjects who developed S or severe COVID infection. And so you can see that the difference between, and I say this on the right is the Pfizer vaccine compared to placebo. This on the left is the Moderna vaccine compared to placebo. So both of these RNA vaccines are showing efficacy in terms of the important outcome. Now, there are other outcomes. For example, does it prevent any infection? Does it prevent asymptomatic carriage? But what we really want to know is, does it prevent you from becoming very unwell? Does it prevent you from becoming hospitalized? Does it prevent death? And those are the severe outcome measures. So this is, again, the data shown in a table form. Basically, you'll see this figure of 95% given for the Moderna and Pfizer. The AstraZeneca is given a lower figure. I won't go into the complexities of that, but even with the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, rates of severe COVID requiring hospitalization were markedly reduced. Now, एक अहम सवाल है कि क्या ये वैक्सीन महफूज है कि नहीं? And तहकीक के मुताबिक ये vaccines महफूज है. So there's plenty of evidence. I mean, this is a slide from the United States, from Boston, from Massachusetts, and it's basically saying that these vaccines are safe. They've been approved by the FDA and the CDC. And of course, in the UK, the vaccines have been approved by the MHRA, and in Europe by the European Medicines Agency. So they have reviewed the data. They've reviewed the data on adverse effects and have considered that they are safe vaccines. And each vaccine is being evaluated completely separately. So each vaccine has to go through this approval and licensing process. Now, ये जो vaccine है, side effects तो हो सकते हैं. ये नहीं कि पूरे मतलब बिना मुश्किलात. There are definitely side effects. Usually ये बहुत कम होते हैं, जैसे सूजन, जैसे बुखार, जैसे बाजू में दर्द या घुटने में दर्द ऐसे. So the severe side effects are very rare. There are allergic reactions that occur. Initially, these were reported quite a lot, but subsequently, once we've had a lot more doses given, it's realized that allergic responses are pretty rare. You do need 2 doses. So depending on the vaccine, for example, if we're talking about the AstraZeneca or the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, पूरे हिफाजत के लिए 2 injections लगवाना ज़रूरी है. So you do need, even after the first vaccine, you're not completely protected. You still need to mask and socially distance, even after you've had the first vaccine. So as I mentioned there, these are side effects which do occur. So it's not to say that side effects do not occur. They do occur. They can occur with the first dose or the second dose. And in particular, there is some data suggesting the second dose may cause these local side effects. Allergic reactions are rare. And initially they said patients who have a history of anaphylaxis to anything should avoid the Pfizer vaccine. We now know that this is not correct, and patients or subjects who have allergic reaction history to any component of the Pfizer vaccine should avoid it. But for example, if someone has an allergy or an allergic reaction to nuts or to other foods, that would not preclude them from receiving this vaccine. So just to summarize, as you know, this virus is very dangerous, particularly for the elderly or for those with chronic diseases. And of course, many of our elderly population also have chronic diseases. So the combination is putting them at very high risk. We know that humans have insufficient immunity to this virus, and pre-existing immunity to other coronaviruses does not necessarily protect from this virus. We know from multiple trials that vaccination can boost this immunity. And we know that the vaccines are safe and effective. We know that there are some side effects, okay? We cannot say that every single person who receives this vaccine will not have a problem. We must acknowledge that, and this is by being honest with patients and subjects. We can reassure them, but we have to be honest about the fact that there may be side effects. But having said that, looking at the data, the risk benefit is much, much, much in favor of having the vaccine. Remember that in the above 80-year-old group, if people catch COVID, the mortality rate is 20%, whereas the reaction risk of having a severe or fatal reaction after having the vaccine is minuscule. So I very much, from my own personal and professional experience and knowledge as an immunologist, I would very much be in favor of having the vaccine. And inshallah, once I'm offered the vaccine, I will be taking it. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to be answering any questions later.
Jazakallah khair.